Sherlock Holmes and the Adventure of the Haunted House. Chapter 1, The Invitation from the House of Death. Some invitations are not sent to be accepted, but to awaken something long asleep in the shadows. That morning on Baker Street, the gentle sunlight seemed to soothe the lingering chill of late winter. I, Dr. John Watson, was sipping a cup of hot tea by the misty windowpane when there came 3 knocks at the door, steady but with a certain coldness and firmness in the rhythm. The messenger was a scrawny boy with sunken eyes and a strangely cautious demeanor. Holmes was sprawled lazily on the sofa, eyelids drooping as if in sleep. But I knew well that such a state was merely a mask for a mind working through hundreds of intricate connections, waiting to be activated by something of value. I opened the envelope. The black ink was written on thick paper with a distinctive ivory hue, an unmistakable mark of old aristocratic families. The smell of the letter made me shudder. A dry lily scent, musty and damp, as though it had been written from within a tomb. The letter read as follows. To Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I am Eleanor Blackwood, the last heir to Holloway Manor. For the past 4 months, since my father passed away under unusual circumstances, I have lived in fear and dread. Strange phenomena have repeatedly occurred in the house, weeping in the middle of the night, fleeting figures in the halls, objects moving on their own. And most terrifying of all, I discovered my father's diary containing blood-stained entries about a centuries-old curse. My 3 closest relatives, 2 uncles and a cousin, have all taken their own lives within the last 4 years. All of them were staying at Holloway at the time. I do not believe in ghosts, but I do believe there is something here, something intelligent, cruel, and watching me. I beg you to come to Holloway. If I disappear as well, at least someone will understand what truly happened in this house of death. Yours urgently. Eleanor Blackwood. Holloway Manor, Dorset, outskirts of London. Holmes did not open his eyes, but his voice rang out clearly, calmly, as if he had already read the entire letter from the expression on my face. Smells like an old play, Holmes said. But if the stage is a haunted house, I want to see who plays the leading role. I frowned. You suspect her? I suspect everything. But please, written in trembling hands are often the earliest funeral dirges, Watson. Pack your bags. We leave this afternoon. The train to Dorset took more than 3 hours. Along the way, Holmes said almost nothing. He was absorbed in reading the files I had brought, just a few small clippings about the death of Mr. Richard Blackwood, Eleanor's father. According to the reports, he had fallen from the 3rd floor onto the stone courtyard during a rainy night. No one knew why he had gone up there in the middle of the night. The police ruled it an accident. But there was one detail that made Holmes linger. Before his death, Richard Blackwood had been plagued by dreams of his ancestors rising from their graves. The village near Holloway Manor seemed frozen in time. Everything was grey, the sky, the stone walls, even the air had the color of ash. When we mentioned the name Blackwood, the villagers fell silent for a moment, as though we had touched a forbidden corner of memory. The carriage swayed as it carried us down a path blanketed with dead leaves toward Holloway. The manor emerged after a sharp turn, tall and solitary, like a massive boulder carved by time and misfortune. Eleanor Blackwood stood waiting on the steps. She wore an old fur cloak, her face pale but with a delicate sorrowful beauty. Her black hair fell over her shoulders, stiff and cold like threads binding her to the ghosts of the house. Thank you for coming, she said, showing no emotion. Her voice was low, soft, like it had just stepped out of a funeral poem. Holmes bowed, his eyes fixed on her right hand, shaking uncontrollably, though her lips remained tightly closed. As she led us on a tour, Eleanor spoke slowly, with pauses, as if each detail she uttered carved a wound into her memory. This house was built in the 17th century by Sir Edmund Blackwood, an eccentric tycoon obsessed with alchemy. For more than 200 years, every generation of the family lived here, and died here. Some from illness, some from accidents, but most, by their own hand. Holmes interrupted. Did your father's diary mention anything about this so-called curse? Eleanor nodded. He believed Edmund's spirit never left this place. And that anyone who defied tradition, who tried to leave, would be drawn back, by some means or another. Watson, do you hear that? Holmes turned to me. Fear makes people call death destiny and devils their ancestors. We stopped before a large wooden door leading to the basement. Eleanor stared at it as if facing an abyss. She whispered. My father forbade all the servants from entering the basement. He called it the soul of the house. Since he died, I've heard moaning from down there, as if someone were chained. But when I open the door, everything is silent. Holmes stepped forward, placing his ear against the wood. Not a sound, but his eyes narrowed. I knew that look, he had just smelled something unusual. Holmes's sense of smell had never betrayed him. We spent the night at Holloway. My room was beneath a vaulted ceiling, with thick stone walls and a grandfather clock that no longer ticked. That night, I could not sleep. The wind howled through the cracks like whispered voices, and on the ceiling, I saw shadows drifting slowly, their origin impossible to determine. Once, I thought I heard crying, very distant, faint, as if rising from underground. The next morning, Holmes was already awake. He didn't eat, nor did he speak much. When I asked, he replied only, "There's something in this house." Not supernatural, but guilt, hidden beneath the dust of tradition. I need to walk around the grounds. Will you come? We followed the western wall, where weeds grew knee-high. Holmes suddenly stopped before an overgrown patch of land where ivy covered the remnants of a stone foundation. What used to be here? Holmes asked Eleanor as she joined us. The family chapel, she replied. But it burned down when I was 6. They said it was lightning. Holmes crouched down, picking up a charred piece of wood. His fingertips came away with a trace of white powder. He brought it to his nose. Phosphorus, Holmes murmured. Lightning rarely leaves phosphorus residue. But an intentional fire often does. Eleanor turned pale. She could barely stay standing. But Holmes said no more. We returned to the house as dusk fell, the red light pouring over Holloway's grey stone facade like blood. A vague unease stirred within me, while Holmes remained pensive, his eyes fixed on the door to the basement. Locked for who knows how long. Holmes whispered something, just loud enough for me to hear. Eleanor's letter wasn't an invitation. It was a warning. And perhaps, the first trap in a cursed labyrinth. Chapter 2, The Phantom in the Night. The most terrifying things are not what we see, but the moments we begin to doubt our own eyes. The storm came without warning, like an ancient fury suddenly awakened. On the road to Holloway, the rain pounded against the carriage roof as if trying to tear through the fragile skin separating man from the vast forces of nature. Wind howled through the old chestnut woods, bending trees like giant arms screaming in agony. The lantern hanging from the side of the carriage swung wildly, casting the claw-like shadows of twisted branches onto the curtain of rain. The carriage halted at the gates of Holloway Manor just as a bolt of lightning slashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the moss-covered, dismal facade. The mansion loomed like a massive corpse awaiting its final burial. Holmes leaned slightly, peering out from beneath the brim of his hat. The wind flared his cloak behind him, making him seem a part of the storm itself. The gate opened without a sound, as if long accustomed to welcoming silent spirits. A thin man stepped out from the darkness, carrying an oil lamp. His face was long, gray like ashes, his eyes sunken like two dry wells. He bowed stiffly, his movements rigid like a corpse just dragged from the earth. "Welcome, Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson," he said in a flat, emotionless voice. "I am Cedric, the manor's butler." Holmes didn't reply immediately. He only gave a slight nod. I could clearly sense Holmes's gaze sweep across Cedric like a blade across wood, slow, sharp, probing for cracks. Eleanor was already waiting on the front steps. Her hair clung to her collar, rain speckled her face, yet she remained unervingly calm. She said little. We were led through the main hall, where the flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the portraits of ancestors, each bearing eyes that seemed to follow the slightest movements of their guests. The fireplace crackled, but strangely, the warmth hardly spread. There was a chill in the air, not from the weather, but as though something deep beneath the stone floor exhaled cold breath with each slow pulse. Holmes was assigned a room in the west wing, while I was placed in the north corridor. Cedric escorted me upstairs, his footsteps making dry, hollow sounds on the old wooden staircase. As we parted, he turned to look at me, those hollow eyes seemed to want to say something, then turned silently away. The room assigned to me was smaller than I'd expected. A high ceiling crossed with black wooden beams, fogged glass windows dotted with condensation. The grandfather clock in the corner had stopped long ago. Something about the room made my skin crawl, though I couldn't say what. I sat down to write a few lines in my journal, as was my custom, when the light suddenly went out. The oil lamp on the table flickered, then died. Outside, thunder rolled like a drum heralding the opening scene of a horror play. I couldn't sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, the faces from the portraits lining the hall appeared, vivid and silent, as if whispering to each other about my presence. At the stroke of midnight, I heard a strange sound. A faint rustling, like fabric brushing against stone. Then soft, barefoot footsteps, slow and steady, moving along the corridor outside my room. I opened the door. A rush of wind made my heart skip a beat. The hallway was empty. Not a soul in sight. But just as I turned to go back, I saw it. A white figure. Not human. Not an object. It hovered, light as smoke, blurry yet clearly present under the dim glow of a wall lamp in the distance. The figure of a woman, head slightly bowed, long hair cascading down and hiding her face. It drifted silently. No footsteps, no shadow, no breath. I froze. A primal fear flooded my chest, the kind of fear one feels when confronted by something beyond reason. I called out, my voice hoarse, unsure if any sound came out at all. The figure paused, as if it heard me, then turned its head. There was no face. Only a deep, hollow void, like a black hole swallowing all surrounding light. I rushed into the corridor, but felt only cold. There was no one there. At that moment, Holmes appeared at the top of the stairs, his cloak draped loosely, a storm lantern in hand. "What did you see, Watson?" I panted, my hand trembling as I pointed down the corridor. A white figure. A woman. She wasn't touching the floor. Holmes asked nothing further. He walked calmly to the wall where I had stood and placed his hand on the stone. He inhaled sharply, his brow furrowed. "There's a scent of ozone. Very recent." I looked at him, puzzled. "Electricity, Watson. Ozone is a byproduct when an electric current discharges into the air. But the question is, why would there be an electric current here, in the middle of the night?" We examined the hallway thoroughly. No footprints, no foreign objects, no strands of fabric left behind. Only the persistent feeling that someone, or something, was watching from the shadows. Back in my room, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window until dawn, heart still pounding, the faceless white figure etched into my mind. The next morning, Holmes came to my room earlier than usual. In his hand was a long black hair, coiled in a handkerchief. "I found it on the eastern staircase," he said, "about 10 meters from where you saw the white figure. And? It's still warm. It fell only recently." I shook my head slightly. "Are you suggesting that the white figure was a person?" "I'm not suggesting anything. But if ghosts shed hair, then science may need to rewrite its entire definition." Holmes slipped the handkerchief into his pocket, his eyes quietly gazing out the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray, like a shroud draped over the still-hidden mysteries of Holloway. Eleanor knocked on the door just as we were preparing to head down to investigate the basement. Her face was even paler than the night before, her eyes red from sleeplessness. "I heard screaming in the night," she said. "Did something happen?" Holmes didn't respond. He merely nodded politely and turned away, leaving me to face Eleanor alone. I wasn't sure what to say. At the end of the hallway, Cedric stood watching. He didn't blink. And I had the distinct feeling that I was not the only one awake last night. Chapter 3, The Bloodstained Diary. Not all secrets are meant to be unearthed, for some were buried to protect the living from the wrath of the dead. Morning in Holloway remained ashen, as if the sun had forgotten to rise in this place. The air was thick with the scent of long-standing mildew, as though every brick had learned how to keep secrets. Holmes said little throughout breakfast, merely sipping his cold Earl Grey tea, eyes fixed on the fog-drenched window. I was still haunted by the white apparition from the night before. But Holmes was not. He seemed to be chasing another thread of thought, an invisible path only he could see. After breakfast, Holmes requested that Cedric open the old storage cellar beneath the west wing, a room that had been abandoned since the previous century. Cedric did not protest, but his hands trembled slightly as he retrieved the large iron keyring from his belt. A subtle gesture, but one that did not escape Holmes's notice. The cellar door creaked open like the lament of rotted wood. We descended by the flickering light of a storm lantern. The air below was frigid, like stepping into a tomb. Moss-covered stone walls, a vaulted ceiling modeled by time. Every footstep echoed as if mirrored by a voice from the past. We searched every corner, each wooden trunk, every decaying drawer. That was when Holmes paused before an old rug laid out across the stone floor. He said nothing, simply knelt and gently ran his hand along the edge of the rug, as if listening to whispers beneath the thick layer of dust. There was a small gap, nearly imperceptible. Holmes lifted the rug. Beneath it, a floorboard of a different color than the rest. He used his dagger to pry it loose. The sound it made was dry and sharp, like the snap of bone. The board popped up. Underneath was a hollow space. And within that hollow, something lay silently, a weathered brown leather notebook, its pages frayed and torn, as if it had endured centuries of resentment. Holmes retrieved it and turned the pages with gloved hands. On the very first page, the ink had faded, but the handwriting remained legible. November 4th, 1792. I heard crying last night. Not from anyone in the house. It came from beneath the floor. November 6th. The crying returned. At first, it sounded like a child. But as I listened closely, it turned into the raspy laughter of a woman. November 9th. I dare not sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see that face. Black hair, white eyes. It stares at me through the mirror. The next page was stuck together with dried blood. Holmes paused, then gently pried the pages apart. November 12th. I have read of it. In Father's old book, The Curse of the Blackwood Lineage. Whoever stays here shall never escape. Holmes glanced at me. In the lantern's glow, his face was cleaved by shadow into two halves, one sharp with reason, the other veiled with a quiet dread. We read on. The diary belonged to a woman named Margaret Blackwood, an ancestor of Eleanor. A woman who had been confined to this very house following the mysterious death of her husband, Lord Edward. According to the diary, Margaret believed her husband's spirit had never left the estate. He had been possessed by something she called the waking shadow, an ancient darkness from pre-Christian times that the Blackwood forebears had brought back from a journey to the north. No one believed Margaret. She was deemed insane, locked away in the north wing for years before dying in solitude. Yet in the diary, she insisted she had seen it, the shadow that appeared after every death in the family. November 17th. I hear whispers from the walls. It calls my name. November 18th. Eleanor saw it. She is only 7. It stood by her bed and smiled. Holmes turned to the final page. November 21st. I cannot leave this place. I know now. I am part of it. If anyone finds this diary, run. Burn this house. Do not stay. I feel blood seeping through the walls. The last page ended in a large, dark brown stain, soaked deep into the back cover. Holmes sat motionless for a long time after reading it. He said nothing. He did not move. There was no sharp deduction, no dry commentary. Only silence. Heavy as the fog. I held the diary in my trembling hands, unsure if it was the cold or the fear. Under the dim light, I saw it clearly. The dried blood on the cover formed a handprint, small, slender, like that of a woman long dead. Suddenly, Holmes stood up. Something's not right. This diary did not bury itself beneath the floor. He strode over to a nearby wall, eyes scanning for something invisible. Then, abruptly, he tapped on the stone. The sound changed. Hollow. Holmes reached into his pocket, drew out a small tool, and began to pry at one of the bricks. After a few minutes, a hidden cavity emerged. Inside was a bundle of black hair tied with a red ribbon, a tarnished silver locket, and an ancient talisman, etched with strange symbols from no language I knew. Then, from above us, we heard something. Not footsteps. Not voices. But weeping. Clear. Haunting. Echoing through the cold tomb of the cellar. Holmes quickly tucked everything into his coat. He didn't speak, just looked at me. A look like a blade, splitting the world into two halves, before knowing, and after. We left the cellar. The sky was still overcast. But within me, another storm was rising, not because of what I had seen, but because of what I still couldn't understand. And I knew, tonight, sleep would not come easily. Chapter 4, The Whispers in the Walls. There are nights that are not white because of the moonlight, but because of fear that knocks endlessly from the other side of the wall, where no one knows what waits. I couldn't sleep. Not because of the white figure in the hallway. And not because of the blood-stained diary Holmes had pored over in deep contemplation all afternoon. I couldn't sleep because of the strange sounds. They began at midnight, when the wind died and the rain stopped tapping at the window. In that moment of stillness, as if the whole house held its breath, I heard it. A faint tapping, steady and rhythmic, like the restrained heartbeat of something waiting. Thump. Thud. Thump. Thud. I sat up, not lighting a lamp, listening intently. The sound came from the wall to the right of my bed, the one adjoining the narrow hallway that led to the storage room. It was steady, deliberate, not the scurrying of rats, nor the creaking of old pipes or shifting beams. It had a rhythm. As though someone, or something, was trying to send a message from the other side. I opened the door to my room and stepped into the hallway, the oil lamp in my hand trembling with each step. The musty smell in the corridor was thicker than usual. I pressed my ear to the cold stone wall. And I heard it. Not just tapping, but whispering. Soft, scattered, as if echoing from a faraway place, slipping through the thick stone and into my ear. I couldn't tell if it was a human voice or just the wind playing tricks. But the syllables, though indistinct, sent a chill straight down my spine. The next morning, I told Holmes. He was sitting by the window, polishing his magnifying glass as he listened. He didn't laugh. He didn't doubt. We need to break the wall. The word stunned me. Holmes had seen something. He wasn't relying on mere instinct like I was. Perhaps he had already pieced together the scattered fragments, from the white figure, the blood-stained diary, to the whispers I had heard. We descended to the second floor, where the hallway outside my room bordered an old stone wall, dating back to the 18th century. Holmes brought an oil lamp, a folding knife, and a small hand hammer. I stood beside him, hesitant, but did not object. Holmes tapped each stone with the hammer. Solid. Solid. Hollow. He stopped. At a spot shoulder height, a dull, distinct sound rang out. He took his knife and carefully chipped away the mortar between the stones. The wall gave way to a small cavity, just large enough to reveal a narrow passage beyond. No light. No breath. Just primordial darkness, like a well opened deep within the heart of the old house. Holmes lifted the lamp, crouched, and entered first. I followed. The stench of damp and decay was overwhelming, as if sealed in for centuries. The air was thick, and the silence absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat echo in my chest. The tunnel was just wide enough for a man to walk hunched over. The walls on either side were rough stone, cracked and rotting in places. We moved forward by the flickering lamplight, and behind us, the wall Holmes had opened slowly creaked shut, as if the house were swallowing us whole. After about 10 yards, Holmes stopped and pointed to a marking on the wall. A carved line, faint but deliberate, as if someone had scratched it into the stone with something sharp. A row of ancient symbols, winding and unsettling. We had seen similar markings on the talisman in the basement days earlier. Holmes murmured to himself. A ritual passage. We continued. The tunnel began to branch. Each path led to deeper, darker places. The air grew heavier with every step. The walls now bore narrow vents, like air holes, from which soft howling winds emerged, like distant, mournful wails. At one turn, we came upon an old wooden door, bolted shut with a rusted iron bar. Holmes used a crowbar to break the lock. Inside was a small square room, windowless, empty. Save for scratches on the walls. So many scratches. As if someone had been trapped there, clawing at the stone with bare hands until their nails broke. At the base of the wall, Holmes found a rotting cloth bundle. Inside was what looked like a human bone, small, likely a forearm. A silver bracelet hung from the skeletal wrist. Etched on the surface was a name. Margaret. The air grew suddenly colder. I felt my spine harden like stone. We said nothing. There was no need. That name, Margaret Blackwood, was the author of the blood-stained diary. Holmes lit another lamp and placed it in a crack in the wall. The light illuminated a carving on the stone, a circle, within it a three-pronged symbol piercing the center, an ancient sign of sealing. He gently touched the wall. Somewhere deeper in the earth, a faint sound echoed back. Not stone. Not water. Metal. And then, for the first time in my life, I saw Holmes falter. Not from fear, but because he knew we had just touched a deeper layer of the secret, a place not meant for man. Holmes turned to me, his voice lower than ever. Watson, remember this, what's buried in the dark is not meant to be discovered, but to be contained. We turned back, retreating into the path we came from. But within me, a thought echoed louder than any whisper. If Margaret was locked in here, then who wrote the last page of the diary? And the tapping last night? Was it a cry for help? Or an invitation? Chapter 5, The Past That Will Not Rest. Every old house has a past, but some pasts refuse to lie still. They cling to every wall, every stone, every whispering gust of wind that sweeps through the night. It was drizzling lightly when we left Holloway the next morning, walking down the dirt path that led to the village of Ravensmoor. Holmes wanted to delve deeper into the house's history. Not through dry archives in a library, but through the living memories of the aged villagers who had dwelled nearby for decades. Ravensmoor lay nestled in a valley, its rooftops moss-covered, its grey stone walls silent, and watchful eyes peered cautiously from behind misted windowpanes. It seemed the name Blackwood not only drew whispers, but also silenced voices the moment it was spoken aloud. We stopped in front of a small tea shop near the chapel. The shopkeeper was an elderly woman with hair white as clouds. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were still sharp. Holmes politely ordered 2 cups of hot tea, then gently steered the conversation toward Holloway and the Blackwood family. At first, she refused. She said such matters were best left forgotten. That speaking of them only invited more misfortune. But Holmes did not press. He simply sat there, quietly sipping his tea, his eyes patient, as though he already knew she would speak. At last, she set her cup down and let out a long, weary sigh. It was the year 1823, she began, her voice low and misty like the morning fog. The master of Holloway at the time was Alastair Blackwood, a direct ancestor of Eleanor. He was a commanding, stern man, known for his devout piety. But the villagers disliked him. They said he lived in his own world, a place filled with shadows, and that the house, day or night, was always locked tight like a fortress hiding secrets. His wife, Lady Margaret, was a young woman from Cornwall, gentle and reserved. The villagers had seen her only a few times in the early years, and after that, no one caught sight of her again. Then one day, a young servant fled Holloway in a state of terror. He claimed he'd heard ghastly screams coming from the basement every night. That the master often locked himself away for hours, speaking to something with no form or face. The whispers began. And then, on a stormy night, a group of villagers, accompanied by the local constable, entered Holloway, demanding a search. It took nearly an hour of pounding on the door before they were finally let in. The old woman paused, her hand trembling as she wiped the corner of her eye. The basement, she said, was like a vision of hell. They found Lady Margaret's body chained to the stone wall. Her face was no longer whole. In her hand, she still clutched a broken necklace, inscribed with the words, "Forgive me." No one understood what had truly happened. Alastair Blackwood was arrested for the torture and murder of his wife. But during the trial, he never confessed. He only repeated one sentence, his gaze hollow. "I had to do it. If not, she would have opened the gate." What gate? No one knew. A few days later, before his final court appearance, he was found dead in his cell. Suicide. On the wall, written in blood, were the words, "Fools, you've let it loose." From that point on, the Blackwood family fell into ruin. In every generation, someone died young, vanished, or went mad. One burned themselves alive. Another threw themselves into the old well. No matter how many times Holloway was repaired or restored, no one ever stayed longer than a season. The old woman's eyes drifted toward the dark tree-line where the manor lay hidden. The curse, she whispered, began with the refusal to forgive. And when a soul is not allowed to pass on, it carries its hatred through the blood. We left the village when the sun was already overhead, though the sky remained dim and gray. On the way back, Holmes was silent, deep in thought. His brows were furrowed, his eyes distant, as if reading from an old book in which every page was soaked in blood. I asked him, "Do you think what happened in 1823 is connected to what's happening now?" Holmes gave a slight nod. "Not just connected," he said. "It's the root." I was surprised. Holmes was not a man who believed in the supernatural or in curses. But today, in his voice, there was something different, not superstition, but a respect for things that defy explanation. Upon returning to Holloway, we went straight to the library. Holmes found in a wooden cabinet a detailed genealogy of the Blackwood family. Alastair's name was marked in red, with the word struck from the record beneath it. But what caught Holmes's attention was a small marginal note. "The key-bearer, judged, but not wrong." He pulled out his notebook and jotted down several details quickly. I asked him, "What does key-bearer mean?" Holmes looked at me. For the first time that day, a spark of clarity flared in his eyes. "If Margaret was the one who sought to open the gate," he said, Then Alistair was the one guarding it. And if that gate was never truly destroyed, then it may still be open. Chapter 6, A Sudden Death. Death always leaves behind a whisper. But only those who listen with reason instead of fear can understand what it truly wants to say. The night wind howled around Holloway like the wails of centuries long rotted away. When I awoke in the morning, the air in the manor was so thick it felt as if it could be sliced into pieces. The sun had not yet reached the barred windows when a piercing scream echoed from the east wing. I rushed out of my room. Holmes was already standing at the door, his gaze sharp as a blade. Together, we ran toward the source of the sound. A horrifying scene met our eyes. On the cold stone floor lay the twisted body of the young servant Thomas, curled up like a beast that had just been hunted. His face was contorted in an expression of sheer terror, as if he had seen something beyond human comprehension. His eyes were bulging, lips torn, and his hands clawed at his own neck as though trying to remove some invisible force that had strangled him. No one in the house could speak a word. The butler Jenkins stood like a statue. Eleanor had collapsed onto the banister, trembling and speechless. I knelt and checked for a pulse. His heart had stopped many hours earlier. Holmes knelt beside the corpse, using his magnifying glass to examine the neck and the edge of the nightshirt. He said nothing, but his eyes seemed to be reading some invisible text written across the victim's skin. I asked, "What do you see?" Holmes pointed to the neck, where the skin had peeled slightly to reveal a faint burn, small, corroded marks. He sniffed the finger that had touched the spot, then frowned. "There's a metallic odor, with a sharp hint of acid. Not the mark of demons, but chemicals, very sophisticated." He stood and ordered, "No one is to touch the body. I need to examine this room in every minute detail." We searched the room Thomas had been sleeping in. The window was latched from the inside, and the door showed no sign of forced entry. There were no marks of a struggle. But Holmes found a faint stain on the brass candlestick beside the bed, nearly invisible unless viewed with precision. He scraped a bit off with a knife and placed it in a vial. I asked, "Is it poison?" Holmes nodded slowly. "Possibly a corrosive compound mixed with an anesthetic, activated by moisture. If applied to the collar and placed near the throat during sleep, it would directly affect the respiratory tract." A chill ran down my spine. A murder disguised as a manifestation of fear. A death that would make everyone believe the curse still haunted this house. Holmes asked, "Who was the last person to see Thomas?" The butler Jenkins answered in a hoarse voice. "I gave him an extra blanket last night, it was cold." That was around 10:30. Holmes turned to Eleanor. "Where were you last night?" Still shaken, Eleanor didn't avert her eyes. "I was in the study, reading. You can ask the maid, she brought me tea at 11. Holmes noted the times. He knew none of them were lying, at least, not in their words. But he also knew, truth often hides in what no one dares to say aloud. In the afternoon, Holmes went down to the cellar, the one with the passage we had discovered earlier. He wanted to determine whether someone had crept in through the secret tunnels to commit the crime. I followed, oil lamp in hand, our footsteps echoing in the thick darkness. When we reached the intersection of tunnels, Holmes stopped. There were faint footprints leading from the left passage, small, consistent, soft-soled. Not a man's. Not a servant's either. He bent low and shone the light directly on the floor. The ground was dry, except for a damp trail leading to the door on the right. Holmes followed it, and we reached an old wooden door, nearly hidden beneath moss and rot. He opened it, it led straight into Eleanor's room. No further words were needed. I understood Holmes's thoughts. It was someone inside the house. Not something from outside. Not a ghost. Not a curse. Someone who knew the secret paths, understood the family's history, could craft poisons, and knew precisely the fear that a timely death would instill in the hearts of the living. That night, Holmes did not sleep. He wrote pages of notes, diagrams of the tunnels, timetables of the household, even the smallest actions dismissed as harmless. He was assembling a picture, and each piece revealed something more terrifying than any phantom, a human being hiding beneath the fabric of legend, weaving tragedy like a mad artist painting in blood. I sat by the window, watching faint lights drip like dying embers through the mist onto the forest path. And I knew, from the moment Thomas died, Holloway was no longer a place of harmless rumors. It had become the battleground for a wicked intellect, waiting to strike again. Chapter 7: The Man in the Black Cloak. Sometimes the most terrifying thing is not a sound, but a silent presence in the dark. Something that doesn't speak, doesn't act, yet simply stands there, and makes your blood turn to ice. That night, fog crept through every corridor of Holloway Manor like a mourning shroud for the death that had just occurred. Holmes did not sleep. He rearranged the house's floor plan, piecing together facts and the faintest traces of evidence. I sat near the fireplace, my mind weighed down with tangled theories. When the clock struck 1 in the morning, the sound of footsteps echoed softly from upstairs, slow, steady, as if unafraid of being heard. Holmes rose immediately, signaling for me to remain silent. We crept along the dark hallway, stopping at the far end of the west wing, where an abandoned balcony lay beyond a set of glass doors. The door stood ajar, letting in a blast of cold wind. Holmes looked out into the murky night, and there, dimly visible under the thin moonlight, stood a motionless figure, draped head to toe in a black cloak. No face could be seen. No hands. Only a posture like that of a statue, unmoving, unbreathing, silent. I made to step out, but Holmes held me back. He whispered, barely more than breath. "Observe first. Do not act." The figure stood for several more seconds, then turned and walked down the path leading behind the grove. No sound. No trace. We followed at once, each step feeling as though we were treading on the drowned souls buried in the damp earth. Through chest-high thorn bushes, Holmes led the way with a small lamp wrapped in cloth, just enough to illuminate our path without revealing us. The figure vanished into a maze of ancient chestnut trees, once marked on an old map Holmes had studied as the site of the abandoned garden. When we arrived, we saw only one strange thing: the ground appeared freshly disturbed. Holmes knelt, took out a short-bladed knife, and gently dug into the soil, revealing an old bundle wrapped in worn fabric. It was a black wooden box, sealed with a rusted iron lock. He opened it. Inside were letters with smudged ink, the paper yellowed with age. Each bore a seal, a snake coiled around a skull. Holmes pulled one out and skimmed it quickly, then his eyes narrowed like a man who had just found the bridge between two chasms. The letters were handwritten confessions, copies, by Eleanor's ancestor, Sir Alistair Blackwood. The contents not only admitted to torturing his former wife to death on suspicion of infidelity, but also revealed his involvement in a secret society, one that performed sacrificial rituals in exchange for protection from dark forces. Holmes folded the letter and looked at me. "No ghosts. Only those who want ghosts to exist, to cover real sins." We returned to the manor just before dawn. Eleanor was awake, her eyes red from crying. When Holmes told her about the box and the figure in the black cloak, her face turned pale. She spoke slowly, as if recalling something long buried. "Since I was little, I heard stories of the man in the black cloak. My mother said that whenever someone in the family was about to die, that figure would appear. But she had never seen it herself, until she passed away, in this very house." Holmes asked, "Do you know of anyone who ever wore such a cloak?" Eleanor shook her head, but then paused. "Except for one person, my grandfather. When I was a child, I saw him wear a black cloak once, in the library. He told me it was to keep out the wind." But after he died, I never saw that cloak again. Holmes was silent for a moment, his eyes lifting to the upper floor. Someone kept that cloak. And used it, to sow fear as a weapon. He turned to me. We need to return to the tunnels tonight. But this time, not to explore, for an ambush. That night, Holmes and I waited in the darkness at the junction where 3 tunnels met. We said nothing. We did not move. Only the wind whispering through stone walls and the slow drip of time into our hearts kept us company. At precisely 3 o'clock, a faint oil lamp flickered in the distance. A tall figure approached, cloaked in a billowing black garment. Holmes gave the signal. As the figure passed, he lunged like a panther, tackling the person to the ground. A choked cry. The hood fell back, revealing the face of the butler, Jenkins. There was no surprise in his eyes. Only one thing, resignation. Holmes asked. Why? Jenkins did not resist. He simply spoke in a voice like old wine slipping through a doorframe. For a promise, to Eleanor's grandfather. For guilt that time cannot wash away. For the eyes of the murdered wife that still watch me in my sleep. Then he laughed. Not the laugh of a madman, but of a man finally freed from his burden. Holmes brought Jenkins back to the house. But I knew, the case was not over. The true ghost was never the cloak. It was guilt, inherited from one generation to the next. And when the first light of dawn filtered through the Holloway forest, we knew, the curtain had only just been lifted. Behind it, an entire stage of shadows awaited. Chapter 8, The Sealed Cellar. Some doors are not merely locked with iron bolts or wooden planks, they are sealed by the fear of the past, where each time they open, the slumbering darkness awakens. That morning, after Jenkins had been taken into custody, Eleanor asked Holmes to remain for a few more days to help her resolve the lingering mysteries of the manor. When Holmes agreed, she led us to a part of the house she had never mentioned before, a worn spiral staircase hidden behind a false wall in the wine cellar. Eleanor trembled slightly as she touched the rusted handle, as though she were waking a sleeping monster. The staircase descended deep into the earth, damp and dark like the bottom of a well. The air was thick, carrying the scent of rusted metal and something, older than time itself. Holmes walked slowly, the oil lamp casting light on moss-covered steps. I followed, my back chilled as if unseen eyes were watching from behind. At the base, we faced a massive iron door, covered in ancient symbols, interlocking circles like a labyrinth. Eleanor whispered. This door was sealed in my great-grandfather's time. No one is allowed to open it. Holmes crouched down to inspect the welds and the lock. He gently touched the edges of the door, then looked at me. No one is allowed to open it, that means someone once tried. And failed. He took a set of tools from his coat and silently began to pick the lock. When the heavy door creaked open, a blast of cold air struck our faces, carrying with it a sound like moaning from the void. We stepped inside. The cellar was twice the size of the largest room in the house. The stone walls were eroded, the ceiling vaulted like a chapel. In the middle stood iron cages, dangling chains, and a stone table layered in thick dust. In the corner stood a life-sized stone statue, a woman bound, mouth open in a scream. On its base, a Latin inscription, faded but still readable to Holmes, read, "The traitor shall be judged in silence." Eleanor went pale. She stepped back, gripping the wall. I've never seen this place, never. Holmes approached the stone table. Upon it lay a rotting leather-bound journal, fastened with a copper wire. He opened it, the yellowed pages fluttering in the breeze. It was the diary of Alistair Blackwood, Eleanor's ancestor, rumored to have tortured his wife to death. In the journal, he documented each cleansing ritual, describing bizarre punishments inflicted on his wife in the name of exorcising demons. The reason? She suffered recurring nightmares about the deaths of his ancestors. Holmes frowned and turned to the final page, where a scrawled, barely legible line read. She knows. She sees. She hears. And now I am watched from within my very flesh. Below the text was a crude sketch, an image of a cellar much like the one we stood in, and a name etched along the border, Beatrix. Eleanor shivered at the name. Beatrix was the name of the murdered wife. They said she died from madness. But if this is real, he imprisoned her here. Holmes remained silent. He moved to inspect the walls. At a section behind the statue, he tapped with a small hammer. There was a hollow echo. Behind the stone was a narrow cavity. We broke through and pulled out a human skeleton. Beside it lay a turquoise pendant, identical to the one Eleanor always wore, which she'd said was the only heirloom left from her great-grandmother. She collapsed to her knees. Her tears fell silently. Holmes gently placed a hand on her shoulder. History is not something we run from. It's something we must end the right way. That night, Eleanor requested a prayer ceremony in the cellar. Candles were lit, and the remains placed into a new coffin. She no longer appeared afraid. In the dim golden glow of candlelight, Holmes stood like a living statue, his eyes watching every detail, every movement, every shadow cast upon the wall. When the ceremony ended, Eleanor asked, "Do you think we've reached the end of the truth?" Holmes replied, his voice deep as a stone falling into a well. "We have opened the sealed door. But one thing still puzzles me. Who sealed it, and why?" He turned to me. "Tomorrow, we'll review every document in the library. Something is still hidden. Not beneath the ground, but in the bloodline itself." And as we left the cellar, the door was locked, not with iron, but with the resolve of a woman determined to end a century-long haunting. But that night, in the darkness of the long hallway, I heard the sound again, a faint scrape of metal against stone. Not from the cellar below, but from behind a wall where no door existed. Chapter 9, The Corridor with No Exit. When a house has too many doors, the most terrifying thing is not what lies behind them, but the one that leads to a place from which there may be no return. The morning after Beatrix's farewell ceremony, the fog was so thick it seemed to swallow even the moss-covered walls of Holloway. Eleanor barely left the study, while Holmes and I began reviewing every ancient map of the estate we could find in the archives. Holmes sat hunched over a large sketch spread across the floor, his expression intent, as if he were reading a book only he could see. He tapped his finger lightly on a yellowed corner of the page, where a faint, almost erased line suggested a corridor. I asked, "What corridor is that?" Holmes replied, eyes still fixed on the map. "Exactly what I've been waiting for. A structure that was removed, or deliberately forgotten." He sprang to his feet, grabbed an oil lamp, and pulled me toward the western wing of the house, an area known as the Broken Wing, long abandoned after its roof collapsed in a storm years ago. The door to this wing was sealed with two crossed wooden beams, but Holmes quickly pried them off. Cold wind slapped our faces as we stepped inside. Dust and cobwebs hung thick in the air, and light couldn't pierce the broken, blotched windows. Behind a wall of rotting boards, Holmes found what he suspected, a small ebony door, no taller than an adult's shoulder. He crouched down and ran his hand gently across the surface, touching strange carvings interlaced like a nested maze. There was no lock. No handle. Just a silent door, as if it had been asleep for centuries. Then, strangely, when Holmes pressed a small point in the bottom corner, the door creaked open with a bone-chilling screech. Behind it lay a narrow corridor, just wide enough for one person to pass through. The air was thick with mildew and the cold scent of ashes. We stepped inside. The oil lamp in Holmes's hand flickered, its light dancing across walls smudged with the marks of hands, dozens of them, as if many had clawed their way through in panic. "Watson, do you hear that?" Holmes stopped suddenly. I listened closely. Footsteps. But not ours. Someone was walking ahead. The sound echoed in a steady rhythm, as if that person knew every brick, every twist of the passage. We followed. The corridor twisted like the innards of some beast, every turn so alike we lost all sense of direction. We had no idea how long or how far we'd walked, only that it grew ever colder, ever deeper, ever darker. Holmes pulled a piece of red chalk from his coat and began marking the walls at every turn. But when we doubled back, the marks had vanished. This is no longer architecture. This is a labyrinth. My chest tightened. The walls seemed to close in, pressing down on me. Then, in a particularly narrow stretch of the passage, the light ahead went out, as if someone had just blown out a lamp. We stood still. No sound. No footsteps. Only our own breathing, rebounding faintly off the stone. Holmes whispered. "Don't panic. Step back." Slowly. We turned to retrace our path. But, the corridor was gone. Behind us was a solid wall. No turns. No passage. As if the hallway we had just walked through had never existed. I clutched Holmes's arm tightly. "This isn't architecture. It's a trap." Holmes pulled out a small folded map, a reduced copy of the old estate layout he always kept in his pocket. His eyes narrowed, then suddenly snapped to the wall on the left. Without a word, he drew a slender knife and plunged it between two stones. A strange sound echoed. The wall trembled. Then, behind it, a narrow gap opened, just wide enough for a shaft of light to spill through from a vent above. Holmes pulled me in. The room was small, with a low ceiling and exposed brick walls. On a stone table sat wooden models of Holloway House, but unlike the current maps, these included hidden levels and unseen corridors. At the center of the model hung a dangling thread, beneath it, a scrap of old paper bearing the words, "To escape, you must go deeper." I looked at Holmes. He nodded slowly. "We still haven't reached the heart of this labyrinth. Someone, or something, built an entire system of misdirection to keep strangers from reaching the core." A shiver ran through me. It felt as if the entire Holloway estate wasn't built to be lived in, but to imprison. Not the living, but memories, tormented spirits, and truths long suppressed. Holmes blew out the lamp, letting the natural light guide us. At the far end of the room, a cracked stone wall revealed a doorway just shoulder high. When he touched it, the door creaked open, revealing a spiral staircase descending deep underground. He spoke softly. "It's time we touched the darkest part of the story." And with a single step, we left behind the corridor with no exit, to begin a journey from which no one had ever returned. Chapter 10, Whispers from the Earth. The most terrifying secret is not what lies buried beneath the ground, but what still echoes in the darkness, long after no one dares to listen. We descended the spiral staircase, the space tightening with each step. Our breath clung to the damp air, the scent of soil and cold seeping through every layer of skin. Sighs and rhythmic knocks on the stone walls echoed around us like a mournful song sung by the night itself. Holmes held the oil lamp, its dim light flickering across cracks in the stone walls, revealing ancient markings, mysterious symbols and bewildering drawings etched there long ago, as though to preserve a warning from centuries past. They weren't merely signs, they sent a chill down the spine at first glance. I followed Holmes in silence, eyes fixed on his every step, wondering what unknown horrors lay ahead. Suddenly, the ground beneath us quivered slightly, as if something had awakened. A cold draft swept through the tunnel, raising goosebumps. Holmes stopped and peered downward. A large stone slab had shifted slightly, revealing a yawning chasm beneath. He looked at me and said, "This is the entrance that leads straight into the deepest part of the house, where almost no one has dared to tread." We carefully descended a rickety wooden ladder, each creak groaning like the lament of imprisoned souls. As we reached the bottom, the space widened, but grew even darker and colder. Every breath became a visible wisp of mist. There, beneath the earth, Holmes discovered a hidden room. The walls were covered in ancient writing and savage illustrations, scenes of torture, blood, and unending agony. Scattered around were decaying pages, chronicling the grim legacy of the Blackwood family. From brutal murders to bone-chilling curses that no one dared to speak aloud. One page detailed the events of the year 1823, written in shaky handwriting, recounting a horrific night when a wife was captured and viciously tortured by her own husband. It ended with a curse, declaring that the family line would forever pay for that crime in blood and tears. Holmes read each line without a flicker of expression, but his eyes revealed unwavering focus. I whispered. Could the knocking in the walls, the white apparitions, could they be traces of tormented souls trying to warn us? Holmes didn't answer immediately. He continued studying the documents. Suddenly, he found a section that had been carefully erased, but still faintly legible under a magnifying glass. It was a code, a strange string of symbols Holmes believed to be the key to unlocking the deepest secret of Holloway. Then, the room began to tremble violently, as if an unseen force did not want us to continue. The oil lamp flickered madly, and a scream echoed from somewhere unseen, an unearthly sound, entwined with the howling wind. I recoiled, but Holmes remained calm, quickly jotting down the cipher. We couldn't stop now. Ahead lay even more unspoken truths, secrets buried beneath layers of earth, secrets that would explain the curse, the servant's mysterious death, the figure in the black cloak, and the corridors with no way out. I looked at Holmes, his eyes filled with resolve, and a hint of worry. We're diving into a bottomless abyss of truth, and every step could be our last. Holmes nodded, his voice firm. The truth here is not for the faint of heart. But it's the only thing that can free the souls trapped in the dark. And so we continued our journey, deeper into the earth, where darkness was not merely a shade, but the embodiment of suffering past, and mysteries yet unresolved. Chapter 11, The Mystery of the Ancient Cipher. Within each symbol lies a curse, and within each curse, an untold story. After leaving the underground chamber with its blood-streaked walls and tear-stained records, Holmes held tightly to the journal containing the strange cipher he had just uncovered. Outside, the wind lashed against the windows, slipping through the cracks to form sounds like the moans of restless spirits. Holmes sat at the writing desk in the Holloway drawing room, the oil lamp casting light across the ancient script on the pages. He pulled out his magnifying glass and closely examined the intricate string of characters. I sat beside him, following every movement, a heavy atmosphere pressing down upon the room. The cipher was no simple code, it was a fusion of ancient Latin characters, arcane symbols, and a sequence of numbers that defied any standard logic. Holmes began placing each piece into position, gradually assembling a clearer picture. He said to me, "If we can decipher these symbols, we won't just uncover the deepest secrets of the Blackwood family, we'll also understand the true reason this house is cursed." We spent the entire night analyzing the cipher, testing numerous methods, from substitution alphabets to applying complex mathematical patterns. Holmes paid particular attention to one recurring symbol, a serpent coiled around a staff, an ancient medical symbol, but also an emblem of temptation and danger. Meanwhile, I examined the wall behind Holmes more closely and noticed faint traces of a map that had been scrubbed away. I called him over, and together we used angled light to reveal the hidden lines. The map depicted a network of secret tunnels running deep beneath the house, connecting rooms once used during the darkest chapters of the family's history. Holmes pressed his lips together. We are standing atop a labyrinth filled with buried secrets, and this cipher is the key that unlocks the door to it. Tension filled the room. Holmes decided to send a portion of the cipher to a friend in London who specialized in ancient languages, to verify the meaning and origins of the strange characters. While waiting, he continued poring over every detail, leaving nothing overlooked. A sudden idea struck Holmes. He stood up abruptly, went to the bookshelf, and pulled down an old volume on medieval ciphers. He believed that the symbols in the journal were a rare form of ancient code, possibly used only by secret societies or powerful families. I sighed and said, "If that's true, then not only us, but anyone who learns this secret, could become a target." Holmes nodded, his eyes glowing with resolve. "Which is why we must act swiftly and cautiously, before it's too late." Time passed, and slowly, the characters began to reveal messages, warnings and prophecies about the fate of those who dared to uncover this dark truth. Some passages described in chilling detail the unnatural deaths that plagued the family, each one presented as the price paid for ancestral sins. I came to realize that beneath the surface of the ancient curse lay a far more sinister plot, possibly tied not only to human forces, but to the murky realm of the supernatural. Holmes looked me straight in the eye. "We are entering a domain ruled by forces most only speak of in legend. But it is our duty to bring the truth to light." And so, in the dim glow of the flickering lamp, with the steady rhythm of rain falling outside, we continued our work, resolute in our quest to unravel the secrets of Holloway House and put an end to the tragedy that had haunted generations. Chapter 12, Light in the Darkness. When darkness is at its deepest, even the faintest light is enough to illuminate the truth. The next morning, Holmes received a reply from the ancient language scholar in London. The letter not only decoded most of the symbols, but also revealed a startling secret. The cipher was a transcription of an ancient curse, etched to protect a priceless relic, an object that could forever alter the fate of the Blackwood family. Holmes read each line of the letter intently, his eyes flashing with a mixture of excitement and gravity. He exclaimed, "What we are seeking is not merely a curse, but a living testament to a dark past." Watson nodded, still shaken by the strange events they had recently endured. Holmes resolved to expand the scope of the investigation, beginning with the Holloway estate itself. He led Watson around the grounds, examining every stone, every window pane, and every ancient tree. Each bore the mark of time, and of stories left untold. What drew Holmes's particular attention was an old lamp hanging in the main hall, its faint light flickering as if trying to signal something hidden. Holmes reached out to touch it. And suddenly, a secret door sprang open from within the wall. Without hesitation, the two stepped inside, the wavering light of their oil lamp barely enough to reveal a narrow, dusty chamber filled with relics of the past. On a table sat a finely carved wooden box, adorned with symbols that matched those found in the journal. Holmes opened the box. Inside lay a brass key and a carefully folded piece of parchment. On the parchment, a message had been written in the same ancient language recently deciphered: "This object must be placed in its rightful location to lift the curse." Watson thought to himself, "This is surely the greatest turning point in our investigation." But even more startling was the sound of unfamiliar footsteps echoing from the hallway outside. The two men quickly concealed the artifacts and prepared themselves for whatever threat might appear. The door creaked open, revealing the stern figure of the old butler, his gaze cold and piercing. He stepped forward and said in a low voice, "This house holds secrets known only to those deemed worthy. What you seek may change the fate of us all." Holmes stared directly at him, his eyes sharp. "We do not seek blind trust, only the truth." The butler nodded, then silently led them down to the deepest basement level, an area few had dared to enter. In the darkness, Holmes and Watson could feel the heavy air, as though each breath carried the weight of history and long-buried secrets. There, they discovered an ancient altar surrounded by ceremonial objects and faded paintings depicting mystical scenes. Holmes took the brass key from his pocket and inserted it into an ornate lock on the altar, turning it slowly. The wall behind them began to shift, revealing a hidden chamber filled with documents, relics, and the most vital clues they had found to date. Watson exhaled in relief. At last, light has been found in the heart of darkness. Holmes stepped into the chamber, knowing that the answers were now within reach, but also fully aware that the path ahead would be fraught with unseen dangers and trials yet to come. Chapter 13, A Promise in the Darkness. When the past is more than memory, when it becomes a burden that haunts every breath, the truth forces one to face the deepest ghosts of the soul. That night, long after the candles had gone out, Holmes and Watson still sat at the study table in the drawing room of Holloway Manor. The precious item they had recovered from the hidden chamber radiated not only a physical light, but also a faint, otherworldly glow that seemed to defy time and fate. Eleanor sat silently, her eyes filled with profound worry, as if she were struggling to hold on to her faith in the future while darkness still cloaked her family. With his keen gaze, Holmes rested his hand upon the wooden box, as if feeling vibrations from within. He spoke of an unfulfilled promise. A secret buried by generations passed out of fear that its revelation would unleash a catastrophe beyond imagining. Watson observed Holmes's every movement, realizing that what they faced was no ordinary case, but a battle with history itself and the fate of human nature. Eleanor's tales of mysterious deaths within her family no longer seemed like mere ghost stories, now they took on a new meaning, as pieces of a far more complex puzzle. The next morning, beneath the weak sunlight filtering through withered branches, Holmes led Eleanor and Watson back to the basement, where they had discovered a stone wall carved with strange geometric patterns. Using a specialized tool, Holmes gently cleaned the surface, gradually revealing ancient symbols that appeared to be a map pointing to a secret location buried beneath the ground. They decided to dig deeper, employing every method to preserve the delicate details that had been safeguarded for centuries. With each layer of soil they removed, they drew closer to a truth that those before them had tried to bury at the cost of their very lives. As they dug, the air grew colder and more oppressive. Holmes noted signs of previous human activity, evidence that they were not the first to reach this place, but also an eerie sense of being watched, of an invisible presence lurking in the shadows. Watson, usually the one to steady Holmes, could not hide his own anxiety. Eleanor, in a moment of vulnerability, revealed a family curse her great-grandmother had once told her, that those who dug too deeply into the Blackwood past would pay with their lives. Under the flickering beam of a lantern, Holmes suddenly paused as he uncovered an iron chest buried deep underground. Cold sweat ran down his brow as he carefully manipulated the lock with utmost precision. Inside lay a stack of documents, the paper yellowed and brittle, but still bearing meticulously written words. Holmes began to read, and with each page, they uncovered horrifying experiments and sinister conspiracies tied to the Blackwood lineage. The documents told of a mysterious drug, engineered to control the human will, leading to a series of orchestrated suicides, each masked as a warning to those who dared to disturb the past. These secrets led Holmes to the conclusion that the curse was not born of supernatural forces, but of human hands, driven by ambition and cruelty, hidden for generations in the darkness. Eleanor trembled, yet her eyes shone with a newfound resolve as Holmes assured her he would help free her from the grip of that darkness. That night, they made a solemn vow: they would not allow the past to continue destroying the future of her family, that the light of truth would banish the shadows of the curse. Their journey had only just begun, and with each step forward, the truth became clearer, but also more dangerous and complex than ever. Holmes knew they had to tread carefully, for the true enemy had yet to reveal itself, and the forces determined to guard the secret would stop at nothing to silence them. Chapter 14: Darkness Buried Deep Within the Earth. The truth lies hidden beneath thick layers of earth, never able to endure the light of the world above, yet it is precisely that light that will reveal the darkest secrets of life. After uncovering the horrifying documents buried underground, Holmes, Eleanor, and Watson could not take their eyes off the ancient text, where every word seemed to lament a bloody and shadowed past. Each page unveiled the brutal experiments aimed at turning people into tools serving the dark power within the Blackwood family, gradually revealing a deep connection to the mysterious deaths and the ancient curses that still haunted the local people. Holmes decided they must explore the basement's depths further, where secret tunnels leading to the Earth's core remained largely unexplored. Armed with professional excavation tools and a powerful flashlight, the three ventured into the cold darkness, every step echoing like a pounding heartbeat in the oppressive space. The stone wall before them stood as the boundary between present and past, between light and darkness, between life and death. Watson took the lead, listening intently to every faint sound beneath the ground. Suddenly, a long, piercing screech echoed from the depths, tightening the air to a suffocating tension. Eleanor grasped Holmes's hand tightly, her eyes filled with worry but also determination. Holmes whispered that each shriek could be the echo of restless souls imprisoned below. Deeper inside, they discovered a vast chamber, its stone walls covered with ancient symbols intertwined with strange drawings. Holmes recognized it as the place where dark forces had performed rituals to strengthen the family curse. Within the room stood a small altar arranged with mysterious objects. Black candles, metal talismans, and a wooden box secured by a rusty lock. Using all his lock-picking skills, Holmes carefully opened the box. Inside was a small book filled with dense, messy handwriting, alongside a vial containing a thick black liquid. Eleanor immediately recognized it as the drug mentioned in the documents, a substance used to control human will and instill profound fear. Holmes cautiously collected all evidence and began piecing together the puzzle. The recent deaths were not caused by demons but by an invisible enemy, an underground power employing twisted scientific methods to manipulate and destroy. The ancient curses were merely a facade concealing this horrifying truth. Meanwhile, Watson found a small door hidden in a corner, concealed by a large stone. When the door opened, a rush of cold air startled them all. Beyond was a narrow corridor descending deep underground, dimly lit by old oil lamps. As they stepped into the corridor, faint whispers grew clearer. Sounds like prayers and laments from those imprisoned here centuries ago. The flickering light illuminated walls stained with dried blood, intensifying the chilling and oppressive weight upon their souls. Holmes quietly stated that this was the repository of the Blackwood family's darkest secrets, the place where truth and suffering had been buried to protect future generations from utter destruction. Yet here too, the promise made in the darkness would be fulfilled, and justice must be served. Eleanor bowed her head, tears streaming as she realized her responsibility extended beyond freeing her family's spirits. It was to cleanse the stain haunting her life and that of generations to come. Holmes and Watson deeply empathized with her pain and vowed to do everything in their power to bring peace to this land. The end of the corridor led to a deep dungeon, where those accused of torture and murder had been confined in utter darkness and cold. Scrawled messages on the walls told of unimaginable suffering endured by the prisoners. Holmes carefully examined the remaining traces, searching for any clue to break the curse and restore justice to the innocent. He realized that it was fear, blinded by the curse and human cruelty, that had created a deadly spiral, obscuring reason and humanity. Their journey to uncover the truth deep beneath the earth had only just begun, and all three knew that the light of justice could only shine if they found the courage to face the deepest darkness. Chapter 15, Light from the Darkness. Some truths are only revealed when people have the courage to cross the boundary of fear, for only then can light illuminate the deepest and darkest mysteries. After the long journey beneath the cold earth, Holmes, Eleanor, and Watson returned with heavy hearts burdened by the secrets just uncovered. Yet the pieces of the Blackwood family's historical puzzle were still incomplete. Especially troubling was the emerging trace of an even more dangerous force, compelling them to be more vigilant than ever. The next day, Holmes decided to return to the room filled with ancient symbols in the basement, this time accompanied by an expert in ancient symbology. They realized these signs were not merely magical charms but bore the mark of a secret society that had existed for centuries, orchestrating many dark events in the history of the Blackwood family. This secret society was known as a powerful ghost in the shadows. No one dared oppose or reveal their existence. Eleanor felt suffocated by the thought that close relatives within the family might be involved in this brutal scheme. Her fear and sense of betrayal grew stronger, but at the same time, it fueled her determination to seek the truth. Holmes and Watson began tracing the secret society's footprints through historical documents, letters, and old diaries. They discovered that the Blackwood secret society had a hidden chamber not only beneath the basement but also in other locations of the old mansion, cleverly concealed with intricate traps and locking mechanisms. That night, as the house sank into silent darkness, Holmes decided once again to confront danger and explore the secret chamber. Eleanor and Watson followed, though deep down they knew this path was fraught with risks. They found a stone pedestal hidden beneath a thick carpet in the library, triggered a concealed switch, and opened a door leading down to a narrow, dark corridor. Stepping into the corridor, they heard their own heavy breaths echoing in the space, as if drowning all hope. Holmes lit his flashlight, the flickering beam revealing exquisitely carved walls that told the Blackwood family's dark story through the centuries. The paintings, inscriptions, and magical symbols sent chills down their spines. The secret chamber was equipped with mechanical and chemical traps to deter intrusion. Holmes used his knowledge and master detective skills to carefully disable each trap one by one. Watson stayed close behind, ready for any emergency. Eleanor not only maintained her composure but also observed every detail, fully aware that this battle was not just for justice but for the survival of the entire family. As they delved deeper, mysterious whispers arose again, this time clearer and carrying the tone of a serious warning. The atmosphere thickened, evoking the feeling of an invisible force watching their every move. Holmes tilted his head slightly, analyzing subtle changes in the sounds, striving to identify their source and avoid falling into traps. Finally, they entered a large room with a stone altar in the center, where old blood stains still marked the surface. On the walls were ancient inscriptions in a language understood only by the old masters, meticulously carved. Holmes called the expert with them to translate, discovering that this was the place where dark rituals were held to satisfy the secret society's ambitions for power and immortal strength. While studying the altar, Holmes found a small hidden compartment containing a wooden box with a set of keys and an aged parchment scroll. The scroll revealed plans to expand the secret society's influence beyond the Blackwood family, using dark and illegal methods to manipulate local politics and economy. From this information, Holmes realized the case was not merely about one family but a much larger conspiracy that could severely impact social security. Eleanor felt a heavier responsibility than ever before. She understood she must face the dark past and commit to the fight for justice. The three decided to bring these precious pieces of evidence to the surface to report them, but they also knew danger was lurking. Every step out of the secret chamber was a challenge, not only due to remaining traps but also because of relentless pursuit by underground forces determined to keep the truth hidden. On their way back, Holmes began outlining a plan to confront these threats, coordinating with the police and trustworthy allies. Eleanor, though still harboring many fears, gradually regained calm and trust in the light of justice. Watson stood firmly by Holmes's side, ready to respond to any emergency. This chapter of their journey was not yet over, but the light of truth was gradually spreading, bringing hope for the tormented souls and the future of the Blackwood family. They knew the battle against darkness was far from finished, and the road ahead remained arduous, but their determination had never been stronger. Chapter 16, The Veil of Mystery Shattered. Truth is not always pleasant, but only when it is revealed can people escape the darkness of deception and freely step into the future. After leaving the mysterious secret chamber beneath the earth, Holmes, Eleanor, and Watson entered the most arduous phase of their investigation. The evidence they had gathered was undeniable proof of the existence of the dark Blackwood secret society. But that power was not merely a memory of the past, it was a present danger threatening their lives and the safety of society. Holmes quickly contacted trusted authorities to plan the dismantling of the secret society. However, the society's conspiracy had deeply infiltrated many areas of power and economy, making a direct confrontation more complicated and dangerous than ever. Those behind it were powerful people with wealth, ready to use any means to protect their own interests. Though mentally prepared, Eleanor could not escape feelings of confusion and pain knowing that some of her closest trusted ones might be enemies lurking in the shadows. The betrayal wounded her soul and placed her in danger, as the enemies were willing to kill to silence her. One night, while Eleanor was studying ancient documents, she received a mysterious warning in the form of an anonymously sent letter. The letter's words were blurred but clearly threatened her to withdraw from the investigation or face death. Yet Eleanor did not back down. Instead, she resolved to find out who was behind these threats. Holmes and Watson also received similar warnings through phone calls and secret meetings. Every step could be a trap, every word could be bait leading them to death. Holmes increasingly realized the malice of their enemies, but his cold intellect and calm kept their spirits firm and allowed them to continue their work. The investigation took them to many different locations, from luxurious mansions to dark slums. Each place held important clues but also concealed unpredictable dangers. They met mysterious figures, from underworld experts to potential witnesses who dared not speak for fear. Holmes used his sharp observational and analytical skills to connect scattered clues and sketch a larger picture of the secret society's operations. Eleanor, with her deep knowledge of the Blackwood family history, helped decode ancient symbols and ciphers the society used to communicate and conceal their identities. In a dramatic confrontation at an abandoned warehouse on the city outskirts, Holmes and Watson were nearly caught by assassins. Fortunately, Eleanor arrived just in time with the support of a surprising group of allies. Chaos erupted, gunshots rang out, darkness and light intertwined in a life-and-death battle between good and evil. After the fight, the investigation team secured additional secret documents related to financial transactions and political conspiracies of the society. The figures and names revealed made Holmes realize the seriousness of the case far exceeded their initial imagination. The subsequent legal battle was no less intense. The secret society used every tactic to silence witnesses and manipulate the media to obscure the truth. Holmes and his team had to persistently campaign, gather evidence, and connect with independent journalists to expose the dark conspiracy. Eleanor played a crucial role in publicizing their findings, steadfastly facing social pressures and personal threats. She became a symbol of determination, a fighter for justice and light amid dark days. Watson, the loyal companion, stood faithfully beside Holmes and Eleanor, recording every step, every small victory, to build a truthful narrative of the fight against darkness. His journals were not only valuable documents but also a source of inspiration for future generations. Gradually, through the power of truth and courage, the secret society's network was dismantled. The top leaders were arrested, their dark schemes exposed under the light of public scrutiny. But Holmes knew this was only an initial victory. The real battle against darkness still held many challenges ahead. The final phase of the investigation ended with a grand trial where those who once held power in the shadows faced justice. Holmes, Eleanor, and Watson, having endured many hardships, still held firm in their belief that truth would prevail, light would dispel darkness, and justice would ultimately be served. Their long journey was not merely an investigation into a family or a secret society but a story of courage, perseverance, and an undying faith in justice. Holmes, Eleanor, and Watson moved forward, knowing that however faint the light might be, it would shatter even the densest veil of mystery. Chapter 17, The Final Steps of Darkness. Truth is only temporarily hidden. It cannot forever conceal the darkness if people dare to face their fears and persist to the very end. The final legal battle reached its climax as the key figures of the Blackwood case faced their most severe trials. Holmes, along with Eleanor and Watson, confronted not only the formidable power of the secret society but also the inner shadows of their own souls, where faith sometimes wavered and exhaustion threatened every step they took. The ancient mansion where the trial took place was transformed into a hotspot of justice and betrayal. The courtroom was packed, whispers buzzing excitedly, and tense, scrutinizing eyes everywhere. Journalists chased leads, Blackwood allies tried every means to influence the process, but no one could stop the advancing footsteps of the spreading light. Holmes, as the main witness and the lead investigator, meticulously presented every detail and tight connection. He pointed out undeniable evidence, sophisticated conspiracies, and a web of corruption that had stretched across decades. Each word, each argument was as sharp as a blade cutting through the fog that obscured the truth. Eleanor, the daughter of the Blackwood family, stood among the crowd with a resolute expression. She recounted the painful memories of her family, irreparable losses, and expressed her determination to erase the vile darkness that had overshadowed her family's name. She represented not only justice but also a symbol of redemption and restoration. Watson, the loyal friend, played an unwavering supportive role. Beyond recording the trial, he helped Holmes and Eleanor handle unexpected situations, from false testimonies to psychological tactics used by the opposition to undermine their spirit. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense like a drawn bowstring, each passing minute carrying a mix of suspense and hope. When the secret society's lawyers attempted to refute the evidence, Holmes calmly analyzed and countered each argument with logic and irrefutable facts. The trial lasted several days, featuring dramatic debates and surprising revelations. Important witnesses appeared, sharing mysterious and tragic stories while unveiling the dark network behind crimes that had once shaken the entire city. In the end, when all evidence was laid bare and the truth could no longer be concealed, the court delivered a stern verdict. The leaders of the secret society, the perpetrators of countless crimes, were held accountable for their dark deeds. Justice was served, light triumphed over darkness. Though the case was closed, Holmes and his companions understood that darkness would always seek to return in new forms. But it was the power of truth, courage, and intellect that remained the most enduring weapons to keep the light from ever being extinguished. They left the courthouse to applause and praise, yet within each of them lingered caution and readiness for future battles. The Blackwood case was concluded, but the journey to seek truth and justice was long and had no final end. Chapter 18, The Light at the End of the Tunnel. In the end, justice is not only a goal but also a harsh journey demanding patience and relentless strength from those who confront the deepest darkness within themselves. The story stretched into the final days of the Blackwood case. Since Holmes, Eleanor, and Watson began their quest for the truth, each mysterious piece and fragmented clue gradually assembled into a complete picture. Chapter 17 brought the case to its climax, exposing the full extent of the secret society's schemes and crimes, as well as the rise of the light of justice. But everything truly concluded only when Chapter 18 unfolded, a final turning point that brought all things back to their rightful place. Shortly after the trial, Holmes and his team received important news from an anonymous source. There remained a secret part yet to be revealed in the hidden cellar beneath the Blackwood mansion. This news awakened a powerful surge of emotion within Eleanor and heightened Holmes's vigilance. If anything had been overlooked, this would be the key to closing the case once and for all. The investigation continued under the faint glow of Holmes's flashlight, every step quickening their hearts. The deep underground tunnel appeared like a mysterious labyrinth, its walls soaked in the darkness of the past. On the old ground, faint footprints left by those who had passed still lingered like blurred marks of history. Holmes carefully examined every smallest detail, applying his experience and knowledge to anticipate the next move. Suddenly, they discovered a secret room, its door hidden behind a sophisticated mechanical system that only Holmes could decode. Inside lay ancient documents, diaries, and other precious evidence revealing the horrifying full truth about the Blackwood lineage, not just the rumors of past crimes but also deeply rooted political conspiracies and corruption. Each turned page carried with it terror and a fracture in time. Holmes, Eleanor, and Watson relived the dark moments that Eleanor's family once endured. They found that the greatest enemies were not ghosts or supernatural shadows, but those who had abused power to conceal crimes and even betrayed their own bloodline to protect their reputation. From this secret room, a grand conspiracy was unveiled. The Blackwood Secret Society had exploited fear of ghosts and demons to manipulate villagers, to cover up their crimes and selfish ambitions. But now, with indisputable clear evidence, the light of truth had dispelled all darkness. A retrial took place, this time with the final decisive evidence. Those who once seemed to have escaped justice were judged fairly, unable to deny the compelling proof against them. Eleanor, empowered by truth and steadfast resolve, not only freed her family from the curse but also restored the Blackwood name, erasing the ghosts of the past. Holmes, with his sharp intellect and unyielding courage, once again proved that nothing can remain hidden forever in the shadows, as long as someone dares to confront and seek it out. Watson, the faithful companion, wrote a new chapter in the collection of classic cases they had encountered together. The conclusion of the Blackwood case was not only a legal victory but also a symbol of restored faith. A light shining into the darkest corners of both soul and society. It stood as a testament to the power of justice, truth, and the human spirit that never ceases to fight to uphold what is right.